Thank you very much for including me. This has been a fun conversation today. It occurred to me this morning that I perhaps should have prepared comments on how Mexico and Central America and the United States can better collaborate on managing migration to better capture the economic benefits of migration, which is an area of my research. But as I was planning my talk and thinking about inequality, I focused on immigration enforcement and the idea of doing less harm through immigration enforcement. So that's what I'll talk to you all about. Immigration enforcement exceeds all other federal law enforcement activities in the U.S. combined. When you look at budget numbers, the U.S. spends $18 billion a year on immigration enforcement, which is more than the federal government spends on all other criminal law enforcement combined, more than FBI, DEA, U.S. Marshals combined. What you see in this picture is that whatever color, the sloping upline, the big sloping upline, I'm colorblind, is that formal removals have increased to unprecedented levels over the last 20 years. The picture starts in 1997 because there was a big reform that year that greatly increased the number of formal removals. Prior to that, it was about half where that line is. That's happened. So formal removals have averaged 300,000 people a year under Bush, 400,000 under Obama. That's during a period with the downward sloping line of an unprecedented drop in unauthorized migration. That line shows apprehensions, which is a proxy measure for unauthorized inflows. That drop actually greatly underestimates the actual drop in unauthorized migration because a higher proportion are apprehended, and also because a much higher proportion these days than in the past are humanitarian, refugees, the unaccompanied children. Today, about 1 in 4 people apprehended at the border are either unaccompanied children or people seeking humanitarian protection, seeking asylum. That's up from 1% in 2005. So apprehensions have really fallen off the table during this period that removals have increased. The other line shows federal prosecutions for immigration-related crimes, so basically the crime of crossing the border. 46% of all federal prosecutions in 2014 were for immigration-related crimes. Half of all prosecutions were immigration-related crimes, up from 13% in 1997. So obviously, immigration enforcement has a huge impact on inequality. It's economically inefficient to send people who have left a region where they don't have work, back, and now they've lost the money they paid, to get to the U.S. They've lost whatever savings they may have accumulated in the U.S. They're disconnected to their economic network in their country of origin. I mentioned this morning the U.S. has deported 1.5 million criminals to Mexico, 250,000 to Central America. It has a huge impact on immigrant families. 40% of unauthorized immigrants have children in the U.S., 40% are married. The impact on the children and on the spouses, whether they remain in the U.S. without their breadwinner or whether they go back to Mexico or Central America and are not able to get reintegrated into schools and into those communities, has a huge negative impact. I keep on talking about Mexico and Central America. I want to point out that immigration enforcement is overwhelmingly a Mexican and Central American phenomenon in the U.S. Mexico and Central America together account for just over a third of the foreign-born population in the U.S., about 35%. They are 71% of unauthorized immigrants. They're 91% of deportees. You might think that that's because we do most immigration enforcement at the border, which is true, but they are 86% of deportations from the interior of the U.S. So the system really targets Mexicans and Central Americans even more than they are disproportionately unauthorized. The good news is, and I know this is too many numbers to digest, but the good news is that after initially doubling down on Bush-era enforcement programs, the Obama administration has taken a series of steps in the last 4 or 5 years to really refocus enforcement primarily at the border and on people who have been convicted of serious crimes. And we can talk more about this in Q&A if people are interested, but the bottom line is 2 things. One is that you can see in this picture the bars that total removals under the Obama administration remain at record high levels, but since 2011, the vast majority, the increasing majority of removals are occurring at the border and not from the interior. And obviously removals from the interior have a much greater impact on settled immigrant families because they are in the interior. This figure predates significant announcements in 2014 to further focus enforcement on just on people who've been convicted of crimes, essentially. We estimate that 87% of existing unauthorized immigrants are outside of these new enforcement priorities. And I want to go over by just a few seconds to point out that the other reason it really matters is that this completely transforms the dynamics of the legislative conversation about immigration reform when Congress gets back to that, because during this period of exponentially increasing enforcement, moderate Republicans have held all the cards during immigration negotiations, because as long as there's been some kind of legalization on the table, Democrats and immigrant advocates have had to take any offer that's been given to them. But if the Obama administration and its successor can really lock in these changes to how enforcement works so that so immigrant communities are not under siege, then it really empowers the left to hold out for a much better legislative package than what's been on the table recently. So these administrative changes are extremely important to a future immigration negotiation in Congress. Thank you.